Hi, class. Here with Stephen Nixon at the Type Directors Club, and I know Stephen from the Type Thursday
Yep.
that we meet.
Yep.
He's working on a lot of really exciting typography
Thanks.
projects, so I was really impressed by his work, and wanted to ask him first: how did you become a typographer?
Yeah, thanks. I grew up in South Dakota and went to school in Minneapolis at the U of M, and now I live here in New York. Growing up, I was really interested in like logos of football teams and stuff, and so I would draw those a lot. And eventually, I realized that graphic design was a thing, so that's what I went to college for, graphic design degree in undergrad. In that process, I also realized that type design was a thing, and I was really interested in that side of making letters. I always thought it was a bit of a frustrating experience not being able to find like the font I wanted, because I had grown up like drawing flyers and things for bands or like controlling everything. So I started to experiment with making type.
You owned.
Yeah, making my own fonts, and I found that like it's very slow and laborious, but it's very rewarding for me to type with something that I made. And that same joy comes from making a website or making a poster with other people's type. It's just anything digital is kind of magical to me, and so that's why I've started making type and how I found my way into producing things for the web mostly.
So you work primarily with digital typography.
Yes, primarily.
So that's perfect.
I've done a bit of bookmaking and I do like handicraft. In undergrad and in a grad program I did recently, I have a lot of fun like bookmaking or screen printing or letterpress typing. I kind of love it all, but I focused most of my attention on the web.
The coding part too?
Yeah. I really like to learn code. I'm more of a designer than a developer, but I keep finding that I become a better designer if I know more about code, because I can work more directly with the medium or directly influence the thing I'm making with somebody else, or just kind of superpower my own workflows. So.
And there's so many exciting new tools out there too. It kind of moves
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
fast. It's good to keep up with it.
It does, yeah, exactly. And so, after undergrad, I went to IBM for 3 years, where I was a software designer, mostly a visual designer for software, and then eventually moved into like a web marketing branding side of things. And I found, it was really good to be able to collaborate with a developer, but at the beginning, I couldn't really speak their language very well, and I couldn't have a direct impact on what was like on the screen and what the users experienced. So more and more, I like took baby steps towards being better at speaking with the developer and also doing like a pull request or ways to get my own code into the actual code base.
I like the baby steps. That's how I started too.
Yeah,
because if I look back at my first code, I feel that was very messy.
It's very confusing. Yeah, definitely. There's a ton to
Then
learn.
you just keep improving. There's nobody that's perfect because it's always changing so fast anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly.
And do you freelance or do you work for companies full time?
Well, I did, after IBM, I went to a program called Type Media, which is in the Netherlands. It's a font design graduate program. And I worked on many projects in the first semester and then one project in the second semester, my thesis project. After that, I came back to the States and I've been mostly freelancing for Google Fonts. Yeah.
Wow. Big company. How's it working there?
It's really been neat. I started working, there's a new format of font, or a kind of an updated format of font called Font Variations. And I don't know how much you've talked about that with your class, but
I keep mentioning it.
Cool, yeah.
Because I'm very excited about it too.
Sure. Yeah, it's kind of like opens this whole new realm of creativity up for type design and type use, especially on the web. It's really allows for some interesting possibilities, and
because it's not a set format, it's not like when you print it, that's it. Like on the web, it can always change, and you have interactivity.
Yeah, exactly. It's as a designer, like you've got a couple of problems with type, especially on the web. You know, you maybe want to use a bunch of different typographic styles to best communicate what you're trying to communicate to the user, whether it's just putting hierarchy on the page or maybe just making it more fun and inviting, or whatever you're trying to do. If you're using traditional digital fonts, each additional style is going to be an additional file, and the developer is probably going to, rightly so, tell you, like, we can't do this, like we got to cap this for like 2 or 3 styles. So a variable font, like, the most exciting part is that it's one file and it's much better compressed than traditional files. So as a designer, you get to use, rather than 2 or 3 styles, you might be able to use 15 or 60 styles, depending on the font. And so that's really exciting. And then there's also kind of unexplored territory in terms of how you might use that for interaction, maybe like revealing that something's clickable by changing its style. These are things I'm really interested in.
And you can find that the perfect weight of...
yes, yeah.
Even across browsers, do they kind of keep the same weights?
Yeah, things render pretty consistently. Interestingly, there are some differences. Firefox, I think, tends to be like slightly bolder, or like there will be differences between like light and dark backgrounds. It's similar to color, really. Colors render differently between different browsers, so nothing's ever
when you design something, it looks perfect in Firefox, but then in Safari, just push it at one line too much.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to watch for those things. And the same is true for fonts. But fonts render differently between browsers in pretty much the same way. So your example of getting the exact perfect weight, if you're using 2 totally different type families, you might find that like the bold of one is naturally quite a lot bolder than the bold of another, because they're different designs from different designers. And so you can kind of nudge that a bit in a variable font file to match the color of a font between different fonts, and that can be really helpful.
So, and variable fonts work on all cross browsers for now?
Yeah, there's very good support. There's a small minority of browsers, or it's mostly operating systems that don't allow somebody to use a variable font. So if you were going to code, the website for a Fortune 100 enterprise, you'd probably want to have some static fonts as fallbacks. But for many other things, you're pretty fine now. It's kind of up there with something like CSS Grid, where there's very good support with a few gotchas.
You've been doing this for a while now. Do you have any advice that you think is good for students to know about how you first started?
My advice is, I guess it comes back to those baby steps. If you're going to try to run a marathon, you have to plan many months in advance, and you have to set up your training. And if you run, almost every day for 6 months, then you'll probably be able to run the marathon. So coding a website or using digital typography with, good quality, it's much the same. You should like seek out little ways to have fun with it. And if you can code many times a week, then picking it up will be pretty natural. So
you're prepared when it comes to shove.
Yes, exactly. So the way I've learned to code is just, as a graphic designer, I wanted to make my own portfolio. It's making a portfolio is a bit like making furniture. You can either go and buy the thing from IKEA and then assemble it. So that's kind of like a Squarespace solution, which is good, and does is great. Is a perfect solution. My furniture at home is all IKEA. But there's the other option of buying some lumber and tools and making the thing yourself, and maybe that allows you to better fit things to what you need or what you want. So my advice is that even though it's slower to build the thing yourself, like just start trying to build your portfolio site or a site about whatever you're interested in. CodePen is an incredible resource. It's just a website that allows you to create quick little experiments with code. And sometimes they're really involved, but a lot of the times, if I want to make a better small UI element, like a better slider, I go and start in CodePen first, and I just make that one thing, and I figure out like the CSS that has to go into that one thing.
Right.
Or if I'm testing how to link in a Google font or an Adobe font or whatever, I'll go into CodePen and I'll try it there first.
And there's always ways to find it on Google. There's
Yes.
CSS tricks and W3 schools in some way. It's a little less organized, or it's organized, but it's the presentation.
Yeah, that's one of my pieces of advice is I always add the letters MDN after I do almost any search for something about CSS, HTML, or JavaScript. Mozilla Developer Network has fantastic docs that are much better, in my experience, much of the time than W3 schools.
Yeah.
So definitely, like, MDN is the place to go.
Oh, good advice.
Yeah, they've like put tons of resources into writing really good guides about everything, like from the real basics, like I don't know what's an H1 tag, all the way to like responsive image guides and JavaScript animations, and just kind of everything is very good.
That's great. It's like a quick lookup tool, because I don't remember most of the tags. I know it exists, but I'm not like, I can't remember every single one.
Yeah.
And I just look it up. It's very easy.
Yeah, and really being a developer is less about knowing things like already, and it's much more about being able to find how to solve problems. And so, yeah, even people who have been coding for years are constantly Googling things. People who are real experts at CSS will Google like a media query when they need it, because it's weird syntax.
You don't
it's
need
hard
to remember.
Yeah, you might not, and that's totally fine. You just have to remember kind of where to find the answer.
Well, thank you so much for that advice, and we want to look at some of your projects too.
Sure. Yeah.
Let's do that next.
Sounds great.